Good evening and welcome. My name is Justin Doxwell. I am the chairman of the Byram Hills Education Foundation, and I'm here with Jessica Lungariello, who is the president. And on behalf of the entire Byram Hills Education Board and the Byram Hills School District, we are very excited to welcome Jennifer Wallace to our high school this evening. Author of Never Enough, in her book, she addresses the increasing pressures teens are under in the toxic achievement culture and offers us, as parents, practical steps that families, schools, and communities can take.
The BHEF is proud of the collaboration with our district that brought this grant to life today. As you may know, we are a volunteer board made up of parents, teachers, and administrators with a mission to enhance the education of all students in the Byram Hills Central School District by funding grants that encourage learning and personal development. BHEF grants extend educational opportunities beyond the district's operating budget and impact every child in every school every day.
If you do not already follow the Byram Hills Education Foundation, please follow us both on Facebook and Instagram. Lots of great information. The Harlem Wizards is on March 10th. Tickets will be on sale as of February 13th at 10 a.m. Mark your calendars. And of course, don't forget to attend the Spring Bash, which is on May 3rd. Always a great night. Just a couple other things. We do have Make Believe Books, which is our local bookstore in the lobby selling books. Please help support them and purchase a book this evening. And if you do have any questions, there are stands in the back of the room with some index cards and pens. Please write down a question. Our assistant principals will collect them. We'll have some limited time for questions and answers at the end of the event. So thanks for showing up for this important topic and discussion. I'll now turn it over to Chris Walsh, the principal of the Byram Hills High School.
Thank you very much for coming out. I really wanted to once again thank the BHEF in partnership with the district for supporting this evening. Really just excited to listen to Jennifer and hear about all of the great things that she researched in this book. And over the course of the summer, I noticed the book in my house, and I noticed that my wife started to use some of the different quotes in the book. And I think it was about the time she said to me, "Chris, parenting isn't about the parent," when I picked up the book and started to get interested in it. So the more I read the book, the more in line it was with the values that we've seen here at Byram Hills, going back all the way to when we started to partner with Challenge Success. And, you know, in speaking with Jennifer, so many of those things that resonate with us about Challenge Success really find their way into the book. And just so excited to be able to have her here, because I think there's three things that I loved about it. Number one is that as a scientist, it's very research-based, and it's obviously we know about feelings, we know what we feel when we experience our kids having discomfort. But this is really about scientists going out, doing the research, and then sharing it with us. And Jennifer went out and found all of that. The second thing is that as I was reading it, I was just nodding my head constantly, thinking about the parallels of the stories in the book with things that I've either experienced here at Byram Hills or I've heard about. So I think that it's very relevant for our community. And then the last part that I really liked is that there are really good strategies that are practical that we can all put together. Now, I appreciate that some of this we are preaching to the choir, but I think for many of you out there, it'll also validate those feelings that you have about the way that you're engaging with your kids, especially as they get closer and closer to that college acceptance zone. So again, I really appreciate all of you being here. Thank you to Jennifer for being here. And I think as a way maybe to start off, the thing that that resonated with me in the book was early on, you went out and Sanaya Lothar She did research in the 90s, and that research sort of pointed in a direction that you might not have anticipated or that she didn't anticipate. So I think that touches to why this work sort of interests you and why you jumped into it. So maybe you can start there and give an introduction to your entry into this work.
Great. Yeah, Sonia Luther has been a huge influence in my own parenting and in this book. So just to let you know, I am a parent of 3 teenagers. I have an 18-year-old going through the college process in New York City. I have a 16-year-old daughter who's a sophomore, and I have an 8th grader. So, when my son was in 8th grade, I was feeling all this pressure in my own home. And I was writing about it for the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post, where I freelance. And I wrote this article that you're referencing in 2019 about 2 national policy reports. One was the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and the other was the National Academies of Sciences. And these were 2 reports put together by the country's leading developmental researchers. And they were naming who are the kids most at risk for negative health outcomes in America today. So they named kids living in poverty amidst community violence. They named children with incarcerated parents. They named children of recent immigrants who come to this country with very few resources. And they named children living in foster care. And then they named a new at-risk group, children attending what researchers call high-achieving schools. These are public and private schools all around the country where the kids go off to competitive four-year colleges. These schools are generally well-resourced. They offer advanced placement classes and lots of extracurricular activities. These schools that my kids were attending, the schools that your children are attending, are now, these kids were now at risk, meaning they were 2 to 6 times more likely to suffer from clinical levels of anxiety and depression, and 2 to 3 times more likely to suffer from substance abuse disorder than the average American teen. It does not mean that every child who goes to these schools will have clinical levels of anxiety and depression or substance abuse disorder. But what these 2 national policy reports were really sounding the alarm to was that these kids are at a much more increased risk than the average American teen. And so that really, it was that research that set me on a path to figure out what could I do in my home and how could I help other parents like me figure out what to do amidst this excessive pressure that our kids are under today.
So, I'm thinking now, here I am, the principal of a school where we have kids who are at risk. And, there's times when I will tell all of my friends I have the best job in the world. Being the principal of Byram Hills High School, there's nothing like it. Dr. Lamia may say that being a superintendent is better, but I truly believe that I have the best job in the world. And I think many of our teachers, we have a wonderful faculty, what they'll say is, how can it be? We have kids that have access to so many resources, they have really loving parents, they have, friends who are supportive for the most part. How is it that we should start to think about these kids as at risk?
So there are a few things happening. So the pressures that we are talking about are bigger than any one family, any one school, and any one community. So when we think about why, when we were growing up, I grew up in suburban New Jersey in a town similar to this one, at a school similar to this one, and achievement mattered to my parents. They wanted me to do well. They wanted me to put forth the effort, have a good work ethic. But achievement was just one of many things that were important to my parents. They also wanted me to be respectful to the neighborhood. They wanted me to have chores. They wanted me to be a great grandchild to my grandparents. They wanted me to enjoy hobbies just for the joy of it. They wanted me to have close relationships with other people. Today, so many of the students, and I have interviewed hundreds of students around the country, talk about their childhoods as achievement it just defines them. They have said to me over and over again that they feel like their worth is tied to their GPA, their standardized test score, what team they make, if they make this part or that part. The other thing they talked about was how the bar of achievement just keeps raising. So, I used to play tennis. It was a stress reducer. Now, the kids described it to me, you're good at tennis? Okay, now we need to get you a USTA ranking. We need every bar, every win sets the bar even higher, even higher. The other thing that's happening, and I talk about this in the book, is this is something that sociologists have been sort of following over the last several decades, an idea called super zip codes. I don't know if anybody here has heard about super zip codes, but when the word was first introduced, the Washington Post located about 650 super zip codes. This would be one of them. Where I live is another super zip code. It is a heavily concentrated community of parents who went to colleges, work white-collar jobs, and have very similar definitions of success and similar expectations. And what happens in these super zip codes is that our kids then, they are now swimming in a pond that is not really the real world. And what I mean by that is, this is how I described it to my son, because the psychologist described it to me this way. When you are in a very high achieving school, even if you're in AP Calculus BC, there's gotta be a bottom 25% of kids in that class. So the researchers who study this call it the little fish, big pond effect. Your self-concept as a student it always is defined by the people around you. When you are developing a sense of self, which is the major developmental task of adolescence, you are comparing yourself to others. That is how you are not sort of in a vacuum figuring out who you are. You are doing it by comparing yourself with others. When you are comparing yourself with others who have parents, who have high expectations, who have resources for tutors, who have resources for, private soccer lessons, the bar just keeps getting higher. So that's what we're talking about. And this book, to be clear, this book does not judge parents. I am so sick of the narrative out there that this is all about parents. We are just living our lives vicariously through our kids. We just want that bumper sticker. I'm going to tell you, it is a minority of parents, and they're there who really do care about the status. The majority of the parents that I interviewed talked about the crush of the middle class, the steep inequity that's been ushered in over the last few decades, not knowing what something like 40% of the jobs are going to be when our kids are out in the job market. It's always been the job of a parent to raise a child who will thrive when we're no longer around. But never has that job felt so uncertain. And when you think about it, when we were growing up, when I was growing up in the 70s and early 80s, I'm 51, life was generally more affordable. Housing was more affordable, healthcare was more affordable, higher education was more affordable. There was slack in the system. So a parent could be relatively assured that even with some setbacks, even with a B- in AP Calculus, that most likely, like I got, that most likely I'd be able to replicate my own childhood as an adult, if not do even better than my own parents did. That's always been the American dream, to not only do as well as your parents, but to do even better. But modern parents, we are facing a different economic reality. We are seeing the first generation, the millennials, who are not doing as well as their parents. And like these parents that I spoke to, we are absorbing these pressures, these macroeconomic forces, not even consciously, subconsciously. And what modern parents are doing, even if we're unaware, so many of us are betting big that early childhood success, getting our kids into a quote-unquote good school, we hope will act as a kind of life vest in a sea of economic uncertainty. But unfortunately, what I saw and what those two national policy reports were telling us is that that life vest that we are so hoping to protect our kids with is acting like a leaded vest for too many kids, and it is drowning them. So this is why I wrote the book. I wrote the book because our best intentions, and I just want to close it out by saying, when I say this is not a parent problem, we are living through an extraordinary time that's not awesome. We are raising our kids in a world with fewer guarantees, fewer social safety nets. Our communities have been ripped apart. We are in our one family homes trying to act like villages, trying to be everything to our kids. And it is not fair. So it is not that modern parents have a psychological problem. Helicopter or intensive parenting is not a helicopter parenting problem. It is a sociological problem. Intensive parenting is not about getting a bumper sticker. It is about weaving individualized safety nets for each one of our kids, because we live in a country that doesn't provide it for them.
Whew.
Let me tell you how I really feel.
So I have to turn around. I have my parent hat on right now, and I'm going to turn around and put the principal hat on. So in thinking about that, right, over the course of time, I grew up as I just turned 50, so as a kid who was in the 70s and 80s, there wasn't really that pressure. I think our parents really didn't, I think they knew when I was home. 10 o'clock news had to remind them that they had a kid. It's 10 o'clock, do you know where your kid is? And they would check to make sure I was there. So what's changed, and what is it that is different between then and now, and why is there that white knuckling?
Yeah. So I do think it's the macroeconomic forces. We live in what some researchers call a monoculture, and the monoculture is sort of this environment that's just in the air that we're breathing. We don't even know we're breathing it. And the environment, what's in the air is late-stage capitalism. And I'm not against capitalism. I live in New York City. I live on the Upper East Side. But there is something about the story of capitalism and the crush and the steep inequity that's been ushered in that is causing this intense fear inside of us. There are many books that I would highly recommend. One of them is Daniel Markovits, who wrote The Meritocracy Trap, I think is what it's called. He and I were on a podcast together, and he argues, and I have to agree, that in our society today, even the winners are losing. Even the winners of our economic constructs are losing. We are now tools. So if we are working in this knowledge economy, we are working ourselves to the bone. We are tired. We are going into offices. This I heard time and time again about what's different today versus then. We no longer have these social contracts in place where you work. My dad worked for Exxon for 30 or 40 years, 50 years maybe even, and he knew he had a pension. He knew that he had a safety net in retirement. We no longer have that social contract. And so what parents are doing is we are working hard to get our kids into these good communities, into good schools. And what I heard so often from the extraordinary parents that I interviewed, and I surveyed over 6,500 parents around the country, and I interviewed them from Alaska on the phone, not in person, but in person in Washington State, Jackson, Wyoming, Cleveland, Ohio, Yarmouth, Maine, et cetera, et cetera. This was a feeling that parents were feeling everywhere, which was this intense fear. And when you have this fear, we're not even aware of it, but this absorbing these macroeconomic forces, the fear about the future, it does come out in the way that we parent. We are, in the words of researchers, social conduits. We are preparing our kids for this fearful future. And it can come out sideways with helicoptering and being fearful. Another reason we're fearful is because I don't think it's so much true in this community, but in a lot of communities I visit, they don't know their neighbors. And so many parents were telling me that they were driving their kids to the school bus and waiting there until the bus came. And I said, why are you doing that? And they're like, well, we don't know our neighbors. We hear these stories. So when you live in a society where you don't know your neighbors, where you are working day in and day out at jobs where so many people, whether they were investment bankers, corporate lawyers, teachers, doctors in hospitals, they were constantly reporting how they felt devalued at work, like they could be let go at any time, that the economy was so rushed, they were always scared. How can we show up to our kids day in and day out and be the steady first responders that we need to be to our kids' struggles when we are depleted, when we feel like we are parenting alone, when we don't even have the safety net of neighbors? We have moved, not in every case, but in many cases, away from our families. So we are having to function as one-person villages. When you don't know your neighbors, when you don't know your community, it creates a fear. And that is a fear that we pass down to our kids.
So in the book, you spoke about your friend Genevieve, who is a working mom, and it's such a fine line between trying to really support your child the way that you think it should be done and really just balancing the practical needs. You also spoke about how the increase in the amount of parenting that the mothers are actually doing. And we have many mothers here who are feeling that burden. So it's not only that the kids are feeling it, but the parents are feeling it as well, and to a large percentage, the mothers more so. Can you, for those of us who might not have read it just this last week, can you tell us about the story of Genevieve and what you learned from her?
So Genevieve, so half of the people in the book were under a pseudonym, and the other half chose to use their name. And Genevieve chose to use her name. She lived in Wilton, Connecticut, not too far from here, and she talked about how her daughter was tracked in the Gifted and Talented program, and so she felt like it was her job to foster her kids' special gifts. And so when it came to it was all fine. I was busy at home. She had 3 girls, but when it came to high school, the daughter was taking on a lot, putting on a lot on her plate. And Genevieve said, she's really smart though. If there's a kid who could do it, it's her, and other kids were doing it. And I didn't want her to feel like I didn't believe in her. So I let her do it. Well, the pressure got to her daughter so much so that in the book, I talk about how the daughter was found, just in time about to slit her wrist with a scissor. And Genevieve talked about how the grind of being a parent, so she had wanted to be like a Jane Goodall, I don't even know, out in nature and doing conservancy, and her husband worked in the city in finance, and so he was commuting so much, so she didn't work to support the family, in that way. And she said everything about her life became about the kids. She didn't describe it this way, but her identity was sort of hollowed out. And it was, what are the kids up to? How are they doing? She's the mom. Her job was to make sure they were practicing the piano and doing all of the things they were supposed to be doing. And she was neglecting herself in the process. She got TMJ, and she remembers going to the doctor and the doctor saying, you really have to prioritize yourself. You have to do yoga. You have to do something to release the stress you're feeling. And she was like, oh, great. Now that's another thing to add to my to-do list. But in that chapter, what I talk about is something that shocked me, which is her daughter was in distress. The number one intervention for any child in distress, this is according to decades worth of resilience research, is to make sure the primary caregivers, most often the mother, the father, the guardian, to make sure their well-being, their support system, their mental health is in check. Because a child's resilience rests fundamentally on the resilience of the adults in their life. An adult resilience rests fundamentally on the depth and support of our relationships. So we are sold a bill of goods by the multi-billion-dollar wellness industry. Download this meditation app, light this expensive candle, take a bubble bath, Those are great stress reducers, but they are not going to give you the resilience that you need that can only come from relationships. And so I was speaking with resilience researchers, and I said, what kind of relationships? Do marriages and partnerships count? And they said no. Like I said earlier, our relationships are already overtaxed, having to be so much to each other. You need to have, according to the research, 1 or 2, and this is true of dads and mothers, 1 or 2 or 3 people in your life outside of your home that you can open up to, that you could be vulnerable with, that you could listen and they could be vulnerable to you. And it doesn't mean hours a week, doesn't mean 5 nights a week. What research out of the Mayo Clinic, and it has since been replicated in other studies, 1 hour of intentional time a week to feel heard and validated, that is what we need to be resilient so that we can show up day in and day out to our kids and be the first responders we want to be. And what I will tell you, we are often told, oh, parents have to put their oxygen masks on first. This goes deeper than that. This goes deeper. This says have 1 or 2 people in your life who know you intimately, who can see and sense when you are struggling, who can see you gasping for air, and who will reach over and put that oxygen mask on for you. And that is a very different level of friendship. And it is not that the parents I met in these high-achieving communities didn't have friends. They had friends. What they didn't have were the time and the emotional bandwidth to be those sources of support for one another. So if there's one thing you take out of this talk tonight, it is to prioritize your own mental health and well-being and your own support system for the benefit of the people inside your home.
So during your research, you went out, you spoke to many, many families, psychiatrists, psychologists, and students. And for us, right, the title of the book is Never Enough. There's some things that we can never change. There's some things that we can never do enough of to get our kids to the point where we can say, your life jacket is on, you're going to be safe. So help us start to think about maybe those students that you found were doing it. What were some of the characteristics that they had? Were there certain traits that you saw that carried over? I know that many of our parents are trying to listen right now to think about, well, I know that our kids, they have some of these. Maybe we can just continue to develop. So what are the findings there, and how can we start to change that negative feeling that we have about the world collapsing around us and to help our kids?
Yes, so I wanted to know that too. Both as a journalist and a mother, I wanted to know who were the kids who were doing well despite the pressure in these environments. I wanted to know what they had in common. What was home life like? What did their parents focus on? What were their mindsets and behaviors? How did they experience friendship? What was school like for them? How did they see themselves as a part of the wider community? And with the help of a researcher at Baylor, I came across about 14 or 15 things that these, what I call in the book, healthy strivers had in common. And I detail it at length in the book. But it boils down to this. The kids who were doing well, despite the pressure, felt like they mattered for who they were deep at their core, away from their achievements and successes. And importantly, they were depended on to add meaningful value back at home, at school, and in the wider community. So it didn't mean that these healthy strivers didn't have setbacks. They had failures. They were sad sometimes and anxious. But what mattering did is it acted like a protective shield. It was like a buoy that would lift them up. And the kids I met who were struggling the most fell into 2 camps. They felt like their mattering was contingent on their performance, as in they only mattered, they were only loved when they were achieving, when they were doing well. The other group, which surprised me, were kids who heard at home and believed that they were valued by their parents, but they were never relied on to add value back to anyone other than themselves. And so what they lacked is what I call in the book social proof that they mattered. They heard it in words, but they never saw how their lives could make a positive impact on anyone other than themselves. And so they were overly self-focused. And research will show you, and it's been proven in adults and kids, that having an overly self-focused lens is heavily correlated with mental health struggles. We need to help our kids turn those lenses outward to see themselves as part of a bigger whole. You guys have a mural here that I love, and it said, "Alone we are drops, together we are the ocean." It is teaching our kids this mindset. A school that I visited in Cleveland, Ohio had this mindset, which is a Jesuit motto, and it is not better than others, but better for others. William Damon is a researcher who has studied purpose in adolescence, and I interviewed him for the book. He's like the guy who operationalized and studied purpose in young people. And what he said to me was, it's not so much that kids today are overworked, it's that they don't know what they are working for. They feel like they are just jumping through hoops for a resume to get into a school. They don't even know what it's all about. And so as parents and educators, what I have come to realize is that we need to be explicit with our kids about why they should work hard. Why should they learn math? Why should they be strong communicators? Why should they learn how to write? So that they could use those strengths that they inherently have, whatever they are, to one day be able to be a contributing member to our society. It is not for them. One last thing I'll say, because this was super profound to me as a parent, was that we are told as parents, our ultimate job is to raise self-reliant, independent adults. And that is a worthy goal, and we should. But the parents of the healthy strivers had a more profound goal that they were aiming for, and that was to give their kids the skills of interdependence. That is, being able to rely on others and have others rely on them in healthy ways. That, to me, is the greatest safety net we could give our kids, to know they are worthy of support, they are worthy of attention, they matter, and they have the ability to matter to others, to be that source of support for other people in their lives.
So what are some of those practical things that either school districts or parents have done that you've seen that were successful in building up that matter gas tank?
Yeah, so lots of things. So the first thing I will tell you, let's first start at home. So Sonia Luther, I interviewed her. My son was in 8th grade, and she recently passed away from long COVID, but for decades, she was one of the world's leading researchers on childhood resilience and parental resilience. And so I said to her, okay, so I know now my kid's at risk. He's in 8th grade. What can I do tonight? What can I do? And she said a phrase 5 years ago to me that has become the North Star in my parenting. And it is this: minimize criticism, prioritize affection. What does that mean? She said, our kids are bombarded with messages of the importance of achievement. Our kids know we want them to be a success. We have put them in these environments that are constantly telling them to be a success, to reach higher, to do more. She said, home needs to be a place to recover from those messages. Home needs to be a place where our kids know they don't have to prove themselves worthy, that just as they are worthy. So minimizing criticism doesn't mean abandoning standards. I still want my kids to achieve. For our kids to matter, they need to know we are invested in their future. We are invested in their success. We see their strengths. We know when they're putting in the effort. we also know when they aren't. And so instead of getting furious and criticizing them, get curious. Be on their team. I've even said to this is my third child that I'm talking about, who I had to get really curious about. And I said, I know you want to be successful. I know you want to be a good student. What do you think is going on? What is preventing that? And we talked it over. He wasn't feeling connected with a couple of teachers in his subjects. And so I said, what could you do to kind of build that connection? Maybe go in early, maybe stay after school. You have very generous teachers who are willing to give you extra time with them. Actually, I don't get into this in the book because it's personal, but he also had a learning difference. He was diagnosed with ADHD, the inattentive type, so it really wasn't obvious until the workload started to get hard. So what I would say is, at home, get curious, not furious. The other half of that equation is prioritize affection. What does that mean? It means greeting your kids once a day the way the family dog greets you, with total joy, just so thrilled to see you. So much of our jobs as parents is just getting through the to-do list. It's so tiring that our kids don't often see the joy that we feel being their parents. And I said to them today, I forget how it even came up, but I said, what I want you to know is that every single one of your parents love you unconditionally. Oh, I know. One of the students said, because I was interviewed by students, which I love, and they said, what do you hope will come of your conversation with the parents tonight? And I said, here's what I hope. I said, I know, because I've met with hundreds of parents and surveyed thousands. I have yet to meet one parent that does not love their kid unconditionally. Unfortunately, we are so busy in our days that our kids don't always hear that message from us. So what I hope will come out of it today are deliberate conversations about how much you matter to your parents, because I promise you that you do. So prioritizing affection, minimize criticism, prioritize affection. Those are two, I think, if I can keep going. Here's another one, okay. So Ned Hallowell, who is a psychiatrist, has this phrase that I've adopted as a mantra in my house, which is never worry alone. So I've said to my kids, I promise you that I will never worry alone. I will reach out to my friends, and I want you to promise me that you will never worry alone. Because if we can worry to a trusted adult, to a trusted friend, you will see that that worry will dissipate. And I actually saw this during COVID. My youngest child, who was then in 5th grade, I guess, within 3 weeks of COVID, lost a teacher to COVID, a beloved teacher in his school. And the school closed because the teachers were distraught the next day. And he, on his own, so fast forward, rewind, I had been reaching out to my 2 best friends, and we had a scheduled talk during COVID every week on our calendar for 1 hour a week, because I was doing the research for the book. I was like, we're doing this, we're having it, and we would have these conversations, and I know, even though I was having them in a private space, I knew my kids were hearing me leaning on my friends. Fast forward, my son loses his teacher. The next day, there's no school. He decides to start what's known as a house party, which is like an app where a bunch of kids can join at the same time. And he emailed his grade, and he said, we're going to have a house party to talk about Mr. Sorrell. Anyone who wants to join is welcome. We'll tell funny stories. We'll talk about if we're sad. Join it. And that, to me, was really one of the best gifts I think I could have given my kids out of COVID, was that they figured out how to create a network of support. And actually, the head of their elementary school joined it, because she was like, I want to tell stories about Mr. Sorrell too. But anyway, those were some, and I'll give you, can I give them I brought the bill?
Yes.
Okay, so I did this. Kids love when I do this. So I learned something from a very wise mother who had 2 very high achieving kids who were hard on themselves. And so whenever they would come home after bombing a test or getting rejected by a friend or hearing about a party they weren't invited to or getting cut from a team, she would reach into her wallet and she would grab a bill. And she would hold up the bill to her kids and she would say, "Do you want this money?" And they'd say yes. And she'd say, "Okay, hang on a minute." She'd crumple it up really small, put it on the floor, dirty it with her dirty shoe, dunk it in a glass of water. And then she'd hold up this soggy, dirty, filthy bill, and she would say to her kids, "Do you still want the money?" And they would say yes. And she would say, "Like this $5 bill, your value doesn't change. If you've been knocked down, if you feel crumpled up and soggy inside, your value is your value no matter what." And that is why we need to teach our kids to not worry alone. Because we need adults and kids, we need to be reminded of our value. And so anyway, I showed them this. They might show it to you when they go home tonight.
So just as a reminder, before the next question, we do have index cards on the podiums in the back, the music stands. So if anybody has a question, you can just use that index card, fill it out, and one of our assistant principals will collect them. So with 5 children and one of them as a sophomore, there's the idea that he's going to be heading out soon. And you spoke a lot about it's really appropriate for our kids to want to have that independence and to pull away from the family. But it's not necessarily our job to allow them to do that, and we can keep pulling them back. So speak to us about that, and I guess it touches on the idea of that interdependency. You talked about never worrying alone or never being out on that branch by yourself. But the idea of interdependency, when as a district, our mission, we're trying to make sure that our students are productive and responsible citizens and leaders of the 21st century. And a lot of times, I think we believe that means that they can do everything on their own. The idea of interdependency and sort of moving away from the family, I'm just trying to get a sense of how that can balance in a long-winded way.
No, great. So when my oldest son, William, who I just always talk about because he was my first, he's my poor first child experiment where I made all my mistakes. So he was, this is the answer to your question, he was turning 13. And everybody was like, "Oh, there you go, good luck. Good luck in the teen years." My mother-in-law, who I adore, even said to me, 13, they go into a tunnel and then they emerge out, when they're young adults. And I'm like, really? Really? And then others are like, "He's such a sweet boy, but just wait, just wait." And so I started interviewing psychologists and I was like, is this actually true? Like, is my child just gonna change overnight as a teenager? And there is so much research on this. It is not true that the storm and stress of the teenage years, yes, our children are going through stressful transitions. Yes, there are going to be ups and downs. But if you have a child who is acting out, locking themselves in their bedroom, wanting nothing to do with you, not wanting to tell you anything, that is not a behavior that is normal. That is a red flag for a parent. So what the researchers were saying to me was, yes, it's appropriate for a child to pull away, but it's not appropriate for a parent to be pulling away too and dismissing it. And so if we think that our kids are going to act out and just do their own thing and want nothing to do with us and that their friends have all the influence, which is actually not true, there's something called a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe it, if you believe your kids are going to drink in high school, if you believe they're going to abuse drugs, if you believe they're going to run off and do high-risk behaviors, there is data that shows your kids are more likely to do that. Instead, if you believe in the research, which is, yes, your child does need to be pulling away. Yes, it is stressful to be a child, but if your child is overly stressed, that's something you might need to really attend to with a professional. If your child is just mildly stressed and being in their closed doors, something that my husband instituted during COVID was something he branded a NOFA and an OFA. So it was, we were all sort of living together, not able to socialize with other people that often. And so my kids were spending a lot of time in their rooms on Zoom and doing schools. So he would knock on the door and he would issue either an OFA or a NOFA. OFA was an optional family activity, like going for a hike or making a meal together or whatever it was. That was an OFA. A NOFA was non-optional family activity. Friday night doing a movie or doing a board game. And it became like this kind of joke in our family, but he was really firm about it. And so we started NOFAs and OFAs. We still do them in our family. But I guess the message that I want to tell you is, don't believe the myth. Our kids need us. We are still their greatest source of wisdom. We are the people, even when they pretend not to listen, they are listening to what we say. The research bears this out. This is the myth of the storm and stress has been debunked. If your child is going through that, get them help, because no child should have to go through that. There is stress, and then there is clinical depression and anxiety, and get that attended to, and knock on those doors. Don't pull away. There's one thing, if you have younger kids, I was in a car once when my kids were really little, and it was a psychologist talking about how she gave her teens facials because she had a feeling that her teens wouldn't want affection. And so this was her way of giving them affection, but in a way that was like cool, like I have this new stuff. And so I started giving my kids facials. And by the way, they're like really into it. So if you're looking for a way in to be affectionate with your kids, buy some product and start giving them facials and masks.
I bet you got some eye rolls on the NOFA though, right? I think the
Yes, but you
NOFA's
pushed
originally,
through.
oh, here we go again.
You push through. And you know, we let them pick activities. What NOFA do you want? And it was often like a movie, or my husband started this thing. Oh, he would love it if I told you. If you want to follow him on Quarantine Food Projects, QFP on Instagram. He and the kids created these huge, elaborate meals, and then they would spend like an hour photographing them. And it just became like this thing. So, you know, see what interests them. You know, NOFAs are sometimes video games. My husband will go and play video games with the kids. They'll team up. It's not just what we want to do. It's what we think they're going to want to do. So that's how you get buy-in.
So you speak about, and I love the idea of getting a PhD in your child. I think it's important really to understand though that knowing them and knowing all about their strengths is different than maybe some of the actions you might think you were going to take off of that. Can you speak about that?
So this was a game-changing statement that I got from a child psychologist, Rick Weisbord, who's up in Boston. He said to me, the self, which is what our children are developing in adolescence, the self becomes stronger, less by being praised, which can feel like pressure, and more for being known. So that shifted so much in me. How can I know my kids? How can I know them for who they uniquely are? And for some reason, this might not be your problem, but it was a problem for me because who they were was so much just wrapped into their identity. It was hard for me to like extract what was it that was unique about them? What were their strengths? And so I discovered something called the VIA survey, Values and Action Survey, which is a free online, scientifically validated survey developed by Marty Seligman and Christopher Peterson. Those are the two grandfathers of positive psychology. And they have a version for adults. They have a version for teens. You could take it as a family. And it pulls out in this 10-minute survey what your core strengths are. And so I'll give you just like a little example. My daughter, one of her core strengths was humor. And so she took this in 7th grade, and I remember she came home one day and she was like, you know, there's so much drama at the cafeteria table. It's like so exhausting. And so I said, okay, which of your strengths could you use to overcome that weakness? And she looked at it and she was like, humor. I could be sarcastic. I could say something funny. to lighten the mood. And I will tell you, she does it with my husband and me. Whenever there's like a little tension in the air, she will pop it with sarcasm. It is the most extraordinary skill that she has. I mean, it is delightful to interact with her because it never escalates. And so this is a way of knowing our kids. Another way of knowing our kids is reading our teacher report cards. Teachers are extraordinary they see so many kids. They are so good at knowing kids' strengths. So I've started annotating report cards. We get grades, but then we also get like the little summary. And I'm like, ooh, I see this too, and how great. And then one last little thing that we do in our family ever since I heard that phrase was on our birthdays. We go around the table and we say one thing we love about the birthday boy or girl. And it's never, I love how well you're doing in AP chemistry. It's like, I love that, on really cold days, you will remember to bring your brother's jacket because he refuses to wear it, and bringing it with you, and he will wear it. Like, I love that you care about people. And my daughter might say to my son, I love that when I'm struggling with a math problem, you'll stop what you're doing, even though you have so much homework, and help me. And so getting to know our kids, getting to know them, pointing out their strengths, things that have nothing to do with achievement. That is how we get a PhD in our kids.
And that really extends into adulthood. And I think in the book you mentioned that there was one woman who kept looking back time and time again, going back to all of those things in her strength book. So it is something that I think you could do longitudinally, and like a scientist, always look back to. And I think that's a really important message in the book as well.
And I think it's important for adults too. I'm actually writing a second book on adult mattering. And what I would love to say, and what I want to show in the book, is that there are so many people I've interviewed for the book who have said to me, I volunteer, but I don't really feel like I'm getting much out of it. I don't really feel like I matter. I'm making sandwiches, but anybody could make sandwiches. I was talking with a friend of mine who was a former investment banker, and she stopped working to be with her kids. And she was like, I'm on these boards, I'm fundraising, but I don't really feel like I matter. And I said, I think that's because you are not using your strengths to make that impact. You have an extraordinary skill set. Let's figure out how to use that skill set. And so anyway, she and I are working on that together. I'm helping her figure out how to use that skill set of incredible finance. She's really concerned about affordable housing and how she can use that to help solve the affordable housing crisis that we're seeing in New York City today.
So I know you're working with an organization now, and the work is expanding. Can you speak about that?
Yeah.
And then I'll go get the questions.
So many parents and schools and communities have reached out and said, okay, we've read the book, now we want more. And so I've co-founded something called the Mattering Movement. It's on the website. It's a nonprofit that gathers all of the researchers, not all of them, but the leading researchers on mattering, all in one place. I call it the Mattering Institute. And you can get all of this free resources, all the resources on mattering, for educators, how to create cultures of mattering in the classroom, for parents, how to create cultures of mattering at home, for kids, how to start a club called the Mattering Project. Just to dork out a little bit on mattering really fast before he comes back. After the drive for food and shelter, researchers find it is the instinct to matter that drives human behavior for better or for worse. So when we feel like we matter, we want to show up to the world in positive ways. We want to be a good student. We want to be a great worker. We want to be pro-social. We want to help the community. We want to be good to the environment. When we are chronically made to feel like we don't matter, or where our mattering feels contingent on our performance, we can turn against ourselves, become anxious, depressed, suicidal. When we are not achieving, we can turn to substances to alleviate that pain, or we can act out in anger, school shooters, domestic terrorists, among the most tragic examples. I don't matter, I'll show you I matter. So mattering is this core human need that is going unmet in so many adults and in so many young people. And I'm just going to finish with one more thing. We talk a lot about belonging and connection. Mattering is a meta need. It's an umbrella term. And under it is belonging, connection, self-determination, mastery. You can belong to a volunteer group, but not feel like you matter to that group. You can belong to Homeroom 301, but not feel like you actually matter there. So mattering to me is belonging and connection in action. We can't make our kids belong, but we can help them figure out how to matter to their peers.
All right, so we're going to answer, I think we'll have time for maybe two of these questions, maybe three. So this first one says, while many parents/moms feel they need to do everything for their kids, how do we encourage them to come along and support each other?
Yes. Oh my gosh. So I was at a law firm, and a mother said to me, you know, I work 60-hour weeks. My daughter's a competitive swimmer. I can't make it to every meet, and I don't know what to do. I said, you are not, why do you have to do this alone? You don't have to do this alone. Their peers are there cheering them on. Your mom friends could be cheering them on, and then you will do that. We have this idea that we need to be these one-person villages for our kids. It does not serve them, and it does not serve us. Running around, running ourselves ragged to be everywhere and everything to our kids. It's not sustainable. It is wearing us out. It is not working, and it is not making us resilient, and it ultimately doesn't benefit them. So in answer to that question, find your group, find other people. I have friends that I call my son's summer mother and winter mother, and those are the mothers who show up for my kids when I'm on the road doing something, and I do that for them when they can't be where they want to be. We need to normalize that we don't have to be everything to our kids. And not only will it benefit us, it'll benefit them, because they need other trusted adults in their lives. They need to have the support of friends. So setting up that sort of social safety net for them, we can do that for them.
So much of your work relies on this idea of finesse between and finding that sweet spot. So whether it's too much, too little, not enough, you know, there are so many things that you speak about that just walk that fine line. And from what I can gather and what I've been able, in just speaking with my wife, the more conversations we have around it, the more we feel like we can figure it out. So that would be one of my recommendations, is having those conversations with the other parents and being okay to be vulnerable about getting it right or not getting it right, and just trying to find that sweet spot.
And the sweet spot is so much bigger than you think it is. Our kids want to know that we love them no matter what. They want to know when we misstep and we make mistakes that we recognize it and we apologize. We model humility. We model that we're I say to my kids, this is my first rodeo. My third child reminds me, this is your third. So.
Should have gotten it right by then.
I need a pillow. This is your third rodeo.
All right, so this one, it's a really good one. I'll listen intently. How can schools help to support a positive culture despite the academic rigor that's asked of them? Yeah. And I think there's some interesting.
I have so much to say on this. I have a lot in the back of the book about what we could do at home, at school, and in the wider community. I think we can start by noticing that each child in this school matters for their own reason, and to help our kids know why they matter, to help them know what their strengths are, how to use those strengths. So number one, to let them feel uniquely seen. Number two, to name the elephant in the room in high-achieving communities, and that's envy. And as I said to your kids when I talked to them today, I said, we have all evolved to feel envy for adaptive reasons. And I went into the evolutionary psychology of it. I'm not sure they got that, but we all evolved to feel it. Now, we don't have to judge ourselves for feeling envy, but we do have to hold ourselves accountable for how we act on that envy. And we can take two routes. We can take the unhealthy route, where it's called malicious envy, where we undercut people, we gossip about them so that we feel better by comparison. Or we can take the healthy route, the benign route. When someone does something that we think is great and we're jealous and envious of, we can admire them. We can ask them how they did it. We can ask them the steps they took. In doing that, we unlock their mattering. We unlock what we value about them. And when they share it with us, we are fed mattering. We matter. We are worthy of somebody investing in us. So I think one of the things we really need to talk about at home are the emotions that get kicked up in high-achieving communities, envy and hyper-competition. And I get into it in length in the book because I think what is so, to me, the hardest part and the saddest thing to see is friendships that are destroyed over competition and unhealthy competition. And what I say in the book is that we can teach our kids how to compete in healthy ways. And I use this analogy that's not mine. It's Timothy Galway in the book, The Inner Game of Tennis. And he talks about a metaphor of a wave and the surfer and the wave. And he says, why do surfers, if the goal is to make it on shore, why do surfers wait for the big wave? Why not use a smaller one where they can easily make it on shore? The surfer waits for the big wave because they want to test their strengths. They want to get stronger. They want to test themselves. And what we can say to our kids is when we are competing, we are helping other people better themselves. It was something that I used to struggle with. I played tennis, and when I was, beating somebody by too much, I would feel guilty and I'd pull myself back, and then all of a sudden we'd be tied, and that wasn't great. And what I learned in that is that actually I was doing that person a disservice. I should have been playing my hardest so that they could improve and they could get better. So teaching our kids healthy ways to compete, that it is not about beating other people, but about making each other better.
So unfortunately, we're running out of time. An hour has gone by very quickly. But in going through this, and as a parent, as a journalist, writing the book, did you come out on the other side of writing this book as a parent feeling relieved or more scared? And what's your takeaway ultimately?
There's so much hope. There's so much hope. There are things we can do tonight in our homes. I am telling you, I saw it in action. And I want to leave you with something that Mark Brackett, who's at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, told me, which I think about when I feel myself being pulled by my more fearful instincts and things that maybe would make me disconnected from my child. And here's what I'm going to give you, and I hope you think of this in these hard moments. He said, think about your child 10 or 20 years from now. What is the story you want them to tell about their childhoods and about their relationship with you? And then ask yourself if you're helping them tell that story.
Well, that's a great way to end, and I think about that quite a bit. Just the experiences that our children have coming in, and it's just such a tremendous community. All of the resources that we have. You have parents here who are willing to do those things, and it is hard work, but ultimately, thinking on down the line, I had my predecessor, he used to say, our children are our joy or our misery forever. And I like to think about that in terms of parenting and thinking about the examples that you give in the book. It's really having them have that sense of mattering so important, and giving the strategies to do that. So again, I wanted to thank the BHEF for supporting this evening. Thank you to the members of our Board of Education who are here. I wanted to thank our district. And again, let's give a big round of applause to Jennifer.
Thank you guys so much. And if you had questions that didn't get answered, I open up my DMs in my Instagram account at Jennifer Breheny Wallace, and I try to answer them, or I try to do a reel talking about them. So if you have something that wasn't asked, hit my Instagram DM and I will try to get an answer to you.